Ms. Ryan, you weren't actually present at the moment of the accident, were you?
No.
You were on your way back from the truck, right?
Yes.
And you'd gone to the truck to get a beer, isn't that right?
Yeah.
At the request of Mr. Rogers.
I think so.
So, you had told the safety officer from the railroad that you spoke to that you would serve as the lookout, isn't that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you had been serving as the lookout?
Yes, I am.
So when you went to the truck to get a beer, you left Mr. Rogers without a lookout, isn't that right?
Yes.
And you've been told by the safety officer that you must have a lookout at all times, isn't that right?
Well, he didn't say at all times.
Did the safety officer give you times when you were supposed to be on the tracks without a lookout?
No, not exactly.
So, you were also told by the safety officer to stay 6 feet away from the active rails, isn't that right?
Yes.
And you testified a moment ago that the tripod's front leg was 3 feet from the active rail, is that right?
Yeah.
So, if I may, I'm just trying to picture this. A tripod, so you got a leg here, seen from above, a leg here, and a leg here. This being the front leg, you're saying that this was 3 feet from the rail, is that right? Is that an accurate depiction of what you just said?
Well, no, because the front leg was 3 feet, but this tripod, it's not every leg comes out at the same angle. So even though the front leg was 3 feet, like the angle was different.
Right, but they extend up to a foot apart. Didn't you testify up to a foot apart, the legs?
Yes.
All right, so do you remember giving a deposition in this case?
Yes.
And you were there and I was there.
Yes.
And there was also a court reporter there.
Yes.
And just like today, you swore to tell the truth. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And you had a chance to review that deposition, didn't you?
Yes.
And correct any errors that might have been present in it?
Yes.
I'd like to read from the April 2007 deposition of Ms. Ryan on page 80 from line 2. Correction,
Go ahead.
line 1. Question. Now describe for us where you set up the transit. Answer. Well, the tripod was set up so that the center pole was about 3 feet from the outside rail of the westernmost track. We set it up there because it gave us the best vantage point for our measurements, and because everywhere else the embankment sloped sharply downward right next to the track. Question. Where would that put the legs of the tripod? Answer. The legs all extend out about a foot or so, depending on the setup. The closest leg to the tracks was at least a foot from the outside rail. Was that your testimony?
Yes.
I guess this should actually have been a 1. You were also told by the safety officer to wear orange helmets and orange vests, right?
Yes.
And you rented
Well, not the vest, just the hard hats.
orange hard hats, and you picked those up from the railroad office and left a deposit?
Yes.
And you wore an orange hard hat.
Yes, I did.
But Mr. Rogers didn't wear his helmet, did he?
Only for a little while.
And at the time of the accident, he had switched to his Raiders cap, his Oakland Raiders cap, isn't that right?
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the Oakland Raiders, that's, their colors aren't orange, right?
No, they're not.
Black, right?
Yes. And silver.
So, you were told that the train would whistle, isn't that right?
Yes, we were told that.
And in fact, you heard a bell while you were at the truck, didn't you?
No, I don't remember hearing a bell. I heard the train rumbling.
As you said in your direct examination testimony. Well, harking back to that deposition, the same document, in the April 2007 deposition, page 80, around the bottom of the page, roughly line 20. Question, what happened next? Answer, well, I went down to the van, and as I turned back up to go up with the beers, I thought I heard a bell or something. Is that your testimony?
Yes, that was my testimony.
It must have been easier to hear when you were down by the truck because the chainsaw was farther away, isn't that right?
Yes.
But the chainsaw was still running up where Mr. Rogers was.
Well, where Mr. Rogers was closer to the chainsaw, so you could hear it more.
And the chainsaw was running, isn't it?
Yes, it was.
And you never asked Mr. Braun to turn off his chainsaw so you could hear better, did you?
No, he didn't.
Speaking of Mr. Braun, he told you that the railroad might have given you the wrong track, isn't that right?
Pardon, can you repeat that?
Mr. Braun informed you that the railroad might have told you the wrong track information, isn't that right?
Yes, that's right.
When
And he
did
should-
it, Counsel?
He showed you the rest on the East Rail?
Yes.
And so you never called the safety office back to check on whether the track information might have been wrong, did you?
Well, we were already on the field, so,
And you were in a hurry, right?
yes, because we had gotten there pretty late.
So after the accident, you were there when the engineer arrived, right?
Yes, I
And he came up to where you were with Mr. Rogers.
was. Yes.
And you testified previously that he said, "What was that fool doing on the track?" Isn't that right?
Yes.
From the April 11th, 2007 deposition, page 81, around the end, which is in the middle of the page, about line 5. And this is with regards to the engineer and the fire person. Question, did either say anything you particularly remember? Answer, no. Did you smell alcohol on either the engineer or the fireman?
Not that I remember.
And you testified that Braun said that he accused the engineer of drinking, isn't that right?
I think so, yeah.
But isn't it true that you testified previously that what Braun said was he muttered "murdering swine" and got upset with the engineer?
Yeah.
Thank you, no more questions.
Okay, I think you've got a natural flair for cross-examination, but what you do is you cross-examine at the same pace and with general, well, you do some change of inflection, but the same pace, and I think you have to remember that there are people listening to what the testimony, and you can help them by changing your emphasis, by changing your pace. And if you get to a really zinger, like the orange hard hat and the black reader's cap, I think that's the point at which I would slow down. And I would, when I get to the Raiders cap, I would kind of slow down and I'd say, well, now that cap is black, wasn't it? Because then that would distinguish from the kind of overall pace that you're doing.